Today I am presenting Sarah Pierce, Litchfield Female Academy. Sarah Pierce was one of the first females to open an academy that combined the rhetoric of Republican motherhood with the beliefs of the Great Awakening and transformed these ideals through improved educational opportunities for girls into new roles for women. She opened the academy in 1792 and officially closed in 1833. With 41 years total being a formal school, Pierce was born in 1767 in Litchfield, Connecticut. Her father was a farmer and potter, died, but in his wake he left a house, barn, and 37 acres of land, and were of middle class respectfully. Her mother was from a distinguished and accomplished family. Her mother's grandfather was one of the first settlers from New Britain, where they manufactured tinware to the American colonies. Her parents married in 1750 or 1751 and moved to Litchfield from Farmington. They had 7 children total, including her, 6 girls and a boy. Sarah's mother died in 1770, and 2 years later, her father married Mary Goodman and then had 3 more children. Formerly little is known of Sarah's education. She attended a dom school at the age of 4 or 5, where females would go to learn the alphabet, simple reading and spelling, her numbers, and rudimentary sewing skills. After dom school, her and her sisters attended a combination of town school sessions and co-educational private or select schools. When she was 9 and her sister Ruth was 12, they attended a co-educational school held by Ashbel Baldwin, a graduate of Yale and later the Episcopal minister at St. Michael's Church. Her enrollment in Baldwin's school placed her at an educational higher level far beyond any other female of New England that is her age. Because her father died when she was 16, this left her oldest brother John Pierce in charge of all his siblings and his stepmother with no help financially. A year later, in love and wanted to marry her, so he decided to send his sisters to be trained to become teachers so that they could assume some of the financial responsibility for the family, freeing him to marry and support his wife and future family financially. Sarah's brother overall was setting her up to start and develop the school into something great, and he was one of the most influential people in her life that helped her to get where she got before it was even founded. Sarah was also heavily influenced by her favorite British author, Hannah More, who she based her rhetoric, which was class-bound, in her curriculum. Her educational philosophy was firmly grounded on the 18th century British female advice literature, which dealt with questions of the woman's separate sphere of domesticity and the proper education to train young women for that role. American writers from the late 18th and early 19th century who gathered some post-revolutionary needs and transformed it into what is now called the Republican motherhood. As a Federalist and Congressionalist, Sarah understood this and the social rankings and used this to base her school and philosophy from. These writers influenced her whole basis for her school and how she wanted to set it up. Her brother did influence her by sending her to school to teach, but more so with her overall philosophy. She was headstrong in her Republican motherhood and implementing that into her academy. These words she spoke to the public ring true to her character and beliefs. More basic teaching in the boys' earliest days would be needed so they could take part in political decisions. Also, women's special moral insights and sensibilities could be passed on to the men in their lives in the conducive, even sacred atmosphere of the home. Although women were intellectually equal to men, they would not threaten to join or replace them in the public arena. Instead, they would enable the men to handle their new Republican responsibilities unselfishly and wisely. Without such wisdom, the Republic would fail. If it succeeded, their role would be a second-hand one, but a real one all the same. She said this publicly in support of Republican motherhood and her philosophy and dedication to it. But in all reality, in her own life, she was very giving. She opened her home to strangers, was extremely charitable, and in later years of her academy, pushed her students to be charitable. She insisted that she was preparing her girls for life as a wife and mother. In reality, she was neither, never married or had children. Her life was her academy. Politically, girls and women alike were not all the same level as men, and were not given the same opportunities for study and furtherance in their future lives. Women were seen as the lesser when it came to careers that men held, and were only seen as wife and mother. Despite her statement, which you may feel is for the empowerment of women, which she did feel women should be equal, she ultimately still believed in the traditional values of mother and wife, and preparing her girls for that, as well as educating them and giving them more of a chance to be something more, but not step on any man's toes and take their place. Many people of the town of Litchfield helped a lot with Pierce and the academy, and believed in the advancement of their sons and daughters, and wanted to help with building the school. Despite her brother putting her and her sisters through school and getting married, he died 2 years later in 1786, and from there his wife was left widowed and with an infant that Sarah had to take responsibility even more for. In 1785, during this time the Depression was at its highest. With the country being in a financial strain, she had to figure out what to do, so at 25 years old, in 1792, she took full responsibility of her family's financial situation and started the academy. She wholeheartedly believed that it was the responsibility of women to solve society's problems by being the future example of the Republic, and it would rise or fall depending on the women to provide the next generation the proper morale and spiritual training to further themselves. Sarah was a heavily charitable person, and she expected her students to be just as such. She would read to her students the lives and works of women who led Christian lives, and was very much so a Christian woman herself. Sarah Pierce was one of the first to combine the rhetoric of Republican motherhood with the beliefs of the Second Great Awakening, and transform these ideals through improved educational opportunities for girls into new social roles for women. This I quoted somewhat in the beginning, and again now, because she expected nothing less from any of her students. She was very tough and serious. One of her contemporaries wrote, "Sarah Pierce are of a woman who took great joy in her students, who showed them lifelong affection and support, and who believed that she was doing God's work when she spread them abroad in the country." Altogether, as Republican motherhood, the calls for her philosophy and her ideas to further her students' motivation with God, school, and charity, as well as in their future families within marriage. Pierce did push girls and women alike to think about what they could do outside those traditional values, but still greatly encouraged the traditional values in which she still believed in, of family, wife, children, and etc. During the second half of the 18th century, young women in America made a transition from the roles of chores, duties of their birth family, and of their marital homes. From early childhood to old age, almost all women spent all their time doing household chores such as laundry, dishes, and cooking. The female academy movement was a direct result of the economic, social, and demographic changes which made it possible for an ever-increasing number of families to provide their daughters with a period of adolescence between childhood duties in their parents' homes and the duties of adult womanhood. She believed in the equal rights of women, and that they could do what any man could, but still felt harshly towards the traditional values where men were the powerhouse of the family and women were equal to them but shouldn't take their role in any way. Despite her traditional values, she did get the more equal side of it, and women were starting to step from the traditional values because of academies like Sarah's. During this time, Sarah was admired for her accomplishment and considered a genius of her time. The public loved her. Her mix of actual academies and ornamentals were unheard of for women and girls. She introduced things in her academy that were not traditional, but she saw it as important enough to teach it. And despite the more or less cheaper, practical, and democratic schools that could house more students, and Christian ideals were retained. Despite this, Pierce had a grit to her, a freedom about her. Her academy had a devotion in which she instilled to a decent and principled life, an existence for men and women to have a purpose beyond what was of the now. Fearlessness was overall what her academy embodied. The enrollments to her school also proved to be more than even male academies during the time, which was a high prestige and honor to show how important she was. She offered classes like math, science, moral philosophy, Latin, geography, and etc. From these, she also offered ornamental subjects, which she often hired former students to teach these subjects. This was because parents wanted their children to learn these trades by way of it being what was traditional and expected. The school was a way of preparing students to be teachers as well, and from this it was crucial to teach it, and also for parental demands on her to instruct it. The school's marginal profit came from the ornamental side of it. It grossed money for the school and helped satisfy the parents by offering it. She was not a true jack of this trade, and from that her earlier years in offering it were not the best for her students. She integrated the academics and ornamentals, which showed her inexperience in the field. Pierce felt the academics were more important than the ornamental side of it, and stressed the importance of being more knowledgeable with academics than the latter. She still felt the need for it, and from that felt that drawing and painting would be beneficial for students to learn, so they learn a sense of design and color to help create a pleasing domestic environment. Despite the push for academics, the needlework and watercolors compare favorably with schools of the day and are indeed superior to many. Despite her disadvantage of not knowing the ornamentals as much as she should, Pierce's students created many works that are clearly identified as her students and are neatly executed and well done. She pushed the boundaries, even then, which was so traditional, and from that the works produced in her school were extraordinary. In conclusion, I feel that she had a great impact on the women of her time. She fully believed in values and traditions and was not blinded by that and wanted equal opportunity for all women. She started a school from nothing and hardly any help and pushed through it and became well known for who she was and how she carried herself. She impacted 3,000 plus students in her time and from there created many influential people and thinkers of her time who then went on to become teachers, hospital founders, ministers, and founders of more schools, which in the end ended her success. Her students started academies that in turn shut hers down, but despite that she was very proud of them and what they became. Her model, which reflected her school's beliefs no longer, was needed because the times were changing and women were no longer following the traditional roles of the society then. Despite that, she had a lot of challenges that she faced and overcame, but in the end she was well loved and influential of her time in many ways than one.